Hi everyone, my name is Selina. I'm a PhD candidate at Oslo University College in Norway. Today I'm going to present the paper that I've written in collaboration with Ricardo, Stig and Mary. The title of the paper is Mapping Human Values and Scrum Roles Studied on Students' Preferences. As the title clearly indicates, what we're trying to do is we're trying to find associations between these two groups of variables, so human values and Scrum roles preferences. Okay, sorry. So how did you come up with this idea? First of all, human values are extensively researched in literature, especially over the last years. The main contributions, in fact, come from the field of psychology, and especially from the work of Schwartz. This author, in collaboration with other authors, identified 56 universal human values, and then they grouped these values into 10 main groups, which are the following: power, achievement, hedonism, simulation, universalism, self-direction, benevolence, tradition, conformity, and security. Secondly, we have noticed an increasing interest in human values in software engineering. In fact, human values are part of human factors, and we know that human factors influence the software development process, especially the software systems design phase. An example of the incorporation of human values in software engineering, for instance, could be the extension from the user-centric design to the value-sensitive or centric design, which means the incorporation of values throughout the whole design cycle. Then the next reason is related to agile software development. In fact, nowadays, most of software companies are adopting or embracing agile software practices, especially extreme programming or Scrum. Our research focuses on the later, on Scrum roles, which are the product owner, who is responsible for the return on investment, the team member, who is responsible for implementing the needed functionality, which could be a developer or a tester, and so on. The Scrum Master is the one who is responsible to observe the whole Scrum process. Finally, we have identified a gap. We could not find any existing literature that tries to connect human values and Scrum roles preferences. And so this is the first one in this kind. In fact, there are some studies that try to connect Scrum roles preferences with personal characteristics, such as personality traits, but not with human values. So in this way, we try to ensure the novelty of our research. So the objective of this study is to investigate or find out possible associations between human values and Scrum roles preferences among students. Basically, we are trying to see whether Scrum roles preferences are influenced by human values or not. This is our general hypothesis, which is narrowed down into 3 main hypotheses for each of the Scrum roles. Of course, our goal is to validate this hypothesis, and to do so, we carried out a questionnaire. The questionnaire that we carried out consisted of 2 main parts. The first part was based or relied on short Schwartz value survey, where the 10 human values were explained and described in this part of the survey, and the subjects were asked to rate the 10 human values in a scale from 0 to 8, where 8 is the most important one. The second part of the questionnaire asks subjects to rate Scrum roles preferences in a scale from 0 to 8 again, where 8 is the most preferred role. Of course, subjects were assisted on site by researchers, and the questionnaires were anonymous. The sample consisted of 57 subjects. Subjects were students in the last year of their computing studies at Oslo University College. Regarding their previous experience with Scrum, in fact, all of the students followed at least 1 course in software engineering, and also they participated in a project that was Scrum related, that involved Scrum. The questionnaires went through a screening process, because we know that when we have questionnaires, especially usually in explorative studies, some questions may be not answered, or we can have many answers for the same question. So this screening process was kind of important. And we identified in this way 6 invalid questionnaires. One interesting observation about our sample is that we noticed that we had 72% of the sample men and only 28% of the sample women, which clearly indicates a gender imbalance. In fact, this is not just a characteristic of our sample, but it's a characteristic that you can notice also in computing studies in general in Norway. Our data analysis process started with a simple descriptive analysis. We tried to identify the means and the standard deviations for each of the values. In terms of human values, the top 3 human values were benevolence, security, and self-direction. As we can notice, the means in these 3 cases are very similar, so we cannot see any significant differences. In terms of Scrum roles, the most preferred one was a team member. With the highest mean value, followed by the product owner, and finally the Scrum Master. Of course, our goal is not just to give this kind of data, but is to validate our hypothesis. So that's why we conducted a more detailed analysis using regression models and correlation coefficients. The software that we use, the statistical software, was SPSS. The analysis went through 3 stages. Throughout the first stage, we tried to develop 3 regression models with all the variables. So the dependent variables were each of the Scrum roles, and the independent variables were the set of 10 human values. In these cases, in the 3 of these cases, the regression models were identified as not significant statistically because their p-value was higher than 0.05. And so under these conditions, it's impossible to interpret the variables and the coefficients. That's why we had to go through the second stage. Through this stage, we started with the supposition that if a set of independent variables does not influence significantly the dependent variable, this does not imply that a subset of these variables does not influence significantly the dependent variable. That's why we try to reduce the numbers of independent variables in order to increase the significance of the overall model. We try to eliminate the variables that were less significant from the previous models. I'm hoping again that the significance of the regression models now will be higher. Now we have 3 new regression models that are statistically significant. However, not all the variables, the independent variables, are important or significant. So the ones in bold were considered, were identified as significant. We have power and self-direction for the Scrum role of product owner. We have hedonism for the Scrum role of Scrum Master, and self-direction for the team member role. The third stage of the data analysis includes correlation coefficients. We try to identify to what extent the dependent variables and the significant independent variables are linearly associated with each other. That's why we found out the correlation coefficients, and also we designed some scatter plots to visualize these correlations. As we can see, the correlation coefficients in the 4 cases for the 4 significant independent variables are within the levels of 0.25 and 0.45. So they are positive. Also from the scatter plot, we can see a positive correlation between the human values and the Scrum roles preferences. What does this mean? For instance, if we expect an increase of the human value, of the importance of the human value of power, this will imply an increase of the preference for the product owner role. And the same thing for all the other variables. Reflection. So to wrap it up, the human values of power and self-direction were positively associated with the role of product owner. People that are guided by principles of power and self-direction are, in other words, are guided by principles of authority and independence. So it's very intuitive to relate them with the role of product owner. However, in terms of authority, we have to note that we are talking about agile software development, and of course the product owner does not have the control over the team. And this is a difference with traditional software development. However, we believe that the product owner does have some kind of authority, because the product owner has to make decisions on whether, on what to implement or not to implement, and so needs some kind of authority or some authority to some extent, also in agile software development. The human value of hedonism was positively associated and significantly with the role of Scrum Master. In fact, individuals that are self-indulgent, they tend to become leaders, and the leaders of the Scrum process are the Scrum Masters. Finally, the human value of self-direction was positively associated with the team members' role. This is quite surprising because we weren't expecting this result. Here, maybe we're expecting values such as conformity or security. So it was quite surprising. However, if we perceive self-direction in terms of creativity and curiosity, then it makes more sense to relate them with the role of developers or other roles of team members. So because developers are the one who always need to implement functionalities, to learn new technologies, and to keep themselves up to date with emerging technologies. So at this point, one may say, okay, these are the findings, but how can these findings be applied in practice? How can these findings be useful? We believe that the applicability or implications of our findings are twofold. Firstly, in enhancing teaching styles in software engineering courses. What we mean by this is, for instance, professors could be able to build profiles of their students before a project starts based on human values. Then when a Scrum-related project starts, they'll be able to assign roles based on the profiles that they're previously built. What this will cause probably is that students will feel more comfortable throughout the project, and this will improve their learning experience, hopefully, and as a result, also their productivity. The same thing could happen also in organizational settings with practitioners. So roles could be allocated based on human values, not only, but also based on human values. And this could improve working experience and as a result, productivity. However, these effects, of course, need to be validated empirically. And this is part of our future work. Threats to validity. In our paper, we explain 4 types of threats to validity, which are the internal, external, construct, and conclusion validity. However, here I'm just going to mention briefly some main points. To start with, we have to mention that this is an explorative study, and with explorative studies, it's very difficult to ensure the reliability of the results. And we are using questionnaires, and as I said, as I mentioned before, usually some of the questions are not answered and so on. So that's why the questionnaires, to minimize this threat, went through a screening process, and 6 of them were identified as invalid. Another threat to internal validity is researchers' biases. Again, this is an explorative study, so there is some kind of subjectivity. For instance, in the selection of human values, some other human values could have been selected and the results would have been different. However, we believe that this research method was based on the well-grounded and work of Shalom Schwartz. And that's why we believe that the research method was well-grounded, and this increases the probability for the findings to be well-grounded and reliable. Determination levels, of course, they measure the power of the prediction power. So to what extent the dependent variables are explained by the independent variables. Our determination levels, in fact, were within the levels of 30 to 50%. One may say that these levels are low, and this means that there are also external variables that influence our dependent variables. However, we believe that the interpretation of the determination levels is quite domain specific. So in domains such as mathematics or physics, of course, these levels are very low. However, in other domains such as psychology, where measuring human values, feelings, emotions is very difficult, and also analyzing data as a result is very difficult. These values are very common. 2 other threats to external validity are the selection of students as subjects. This can be identified as a threat to generalizing the findings of our results to other contexts. However, we believe that many computing studies, in fact, they use students as their subjects, and authors of these studies strongly argue that that students are very important in the identification of trends. So we don't see this as an important threat. And finally, we selected students from one university, and probably if we have selected students from other universities in other countries, the results could have been different. However, here we believe that the human values are more related to the individual rather than influenced by the context. So regarding our future work, we did not actually identify any study that tries to connect human values and emotions in software engineering. So we believe that this will be part of our future research, because there is potential in this kind of association. We also invite other researchers to replicate the study, maybe by using larger samples or more diverse samples. For instance, by having students in different levels of their studies, bachelor, master's, PhD students, and also by having students from different universities. Again, we're going to replicate the study in organizational settings by having Scrum practitioners as subjects instead of students. And finally, we are going to conduct a more detailed analysis, which considers also other variables such as gender imbalance or experience, and we'll try to explore how these variables could influence our associations. And yeah, that's the end of my presentation. Thank you very much for listening and for your time. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer.